I never expected that sharing a microwave at work would change my entire life, but here we are. I'm Mason, and for the past 3 years I've been a customer service rep at a tech support company. It's one of those jobs where you wear a headset all day, talking people through password resets and frozen screens, and honestly it can be mind-numbing. But there was this one thing that made every shift bearable, this one small ritual that I looked forward to more than anything else, and that was lunch with Parker. Parker started on the same day I did, 3 years ago. We went through training together, sitting in those uncomfortable plastic chairs while our supervisor droned on about call metrics and customer satisfaction scores. I remember noticing him immediately because he had this way of tilting his head when he was concentrating, like he was trying to hear something just beyond the words being spoken. He wore these dark-rimmed glasses that he'd push up his nose whenever he was thinking hard about something, and he had this quiet, steady presence that somehow cut through all the noise of that chaotic first week. We got assigned to adjacent cubicles, and on our first real day on the phones during our lunch break, we both ended up in the break room at the same time. I was heating up leftover pasta, and he walked in with this carefully packed bento box that his mum had made for him. We made eye contact, did that awkward smile thing you do with co-workers you barely know, and then he said, "First day's brutal, huh?" And I laughed and said something like, "I've already forgotten everything they taught us." He grinned at that, this genuine warm smile that reached his eyes, and said, "Same. I'm just hoping I don't accidentally tell someone to delete their entire hard drive." That was it. That was the beginning. From that day forward, we just naturally gravitated toward each other during lunch. It wasn't planned or discussed, it just happened. Every day at noon, I'd hear him log off his call, and I'd wrap up whatever I was doing, and we'd meet at the break room. Sometimes one of us would get there first and wait for the other. We'd heat up our food, sit at the same table by the window that looked out over the parking lot, and just talk. At first, we talked about work stuff, difficult customers, weird technical issues, the quirks of our co-workers. But gradually, over weeks and months, the conversations deepened. I learned that Parker was the youngest of 3 siblings, that he'd studied music theory in college before realizing he needed a more stable income, that he played piano and sometimes performed at a local coffee shop on weekends. He learned that I'd grown up in a small town 2 hours away, that I was close with my sister but hadn't spoken to my parents in years, that I'd always wanted to write but never had the confidence to try. There was something so easy about talking to Parker. He listened in this focused way, like every word I said mattered, and when he spoke he chose his words carefully, thoughtfully. He had this dry sense of humour that would catch me off guard, making me laugh so hard I'd nearly choke on my food. And he had this habit of touching my arm when he was making a point, just this brief, casual contact that I started to notice more and more as time went on. I didn't realise I was falling for him at first. It crept up on me slowly, disguised as friendship, as routine, as the simple comfort of having someone to share lunch with. But there were these moments, these small instances that started accumulating, where I'd feel something shift inside me, like the time he brought me soup when I mentioned I wasn't feeling well. This homemade chicken noodle soup his mum had taught him to make, still warm in a thermos. Or the day I was dealing with a particularly nasty caller who'd reduced me to near tears, and Parker noticed immediately when I came to lunch, saw it in my face before I said anything, and just reached across the table and squeezed my hand and said, "You're doing great. That person was just having a bad day and taking it out on you. It's not about you." The touch of his hand on mine lingered for days. I kept replaying it, the warmth of his palm, the gentle pressure of his fingers, the way my heart had stumbled in my chest. I started noticing other things too. The way his hair fell across his forehead when he leaned forward, the small scar above his left eyebrow that he got falling off a bike when he was 7, the exact shade of brown in his eyes, like honey held up to sunlight, the way his voice got softer when he talked about things that mattered to him. I started looking forward to lunch with an intensity that bordered on ridiculous. I'd plan what to wear the night before, which was absurd because we wore headsets and sat in cubicles all day, and it's not like Parker was looking at my outfit. But I wanted to look good, wanted him to notice me, even though I wasn't ready to admit why. I'd think about conversation topics during my morning calls, storing up little stories and observations to share with him. And if for some reason our lunch schedules didn't align, if he had to take lunch early or late because of meeting coverage, the whole day felt off balance, incomplete. About a year into working together, something shifted between us. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I felt it. Our conversations became more personal, more vulnerable. He told me about a bad breakup he'd gone through in college, how it had made him wary of getting close to people. He didn't specify the gender of his ex, but the way he told the story, carefully avoiding pronouns, made me wonder. Made me hope, maybe, though I tried not to let myself go there. I told him about my complicated relationship with my family, how I'd come out to them 2 years earlier and they'd responded with silence, with distance, with this polite coldness that somehow hurt worse than outright rejection. Parker listened, and when I finished he said, "I'm sorry. You deserved better than that. You deserve people who celebrate every part of you." And the way he said it, the fierce certainty in his voice, made something crack open inside me. After that conversation, he started bringing me little things, a book he thought I'd like, a funny mug he found at a thrift store, a playlist he'd made of songs he thought I'd enjoy. These small gestures that felt like more than friendship but less than anything I could name. I reciprocated, bringing him his favourite candy bars, remembering how he took his coffee, texting him articles about music theory or piano performances I thought he'd appreciate. We started texting outside of work too. At first just work-related things, but then it expanded. Good morning texts, good night texts, random thoughts throughout the day, memes that made us think of each other. I'd lie in bed at night, phone glowing in the darkness, smiling at something he'd sent, and I'd think, this is more than friendship. This has to be more than friendship. But I was terrified to say anything, terrified to risk what we had. What if I was reading it wrong? What if he just saw me as a really good friend and my confession would make everything awkward? We worked together, sat next to each other every single day. If I ruined this, I'd lose not just whatever we might have been, but also the person who'd become the best part of my daily life. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Tuesday, completely ordinary in every way except that it wasn't. We were at lunch, sitting in our usual spot, and Parker was telling me about a piano piece he'd been learning. This complicated classical composition that he'd been working on for months. He was animated, excited, using his hands to describe the music, and I was watching him, just completely absorbed in his enthusiasm, in the light in his eyes, in the passion in his voice. And he must have noticed me staring because he stopped mid-sentence and said, "What?" And I should have said nothing, should have brushed it off, but instead, I heard myself say, "I just really like listening to you talk about things you care about." The air between us changed, became heavier, charged with something electric. Parker went very still, his eyes locked on mine, and he said quietly, "Mason, I need to tell you something." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Okay." He took a breath, pushed his glasses up his nose, a nervous gesture I'd seen 1,000 times. "I look forward to lunch every day, not because I need a break from work, but because I get to spend time with you. And I know we're friends. We're really good friends, but He paused, and I could see him gathering courage. "I think about you all the time. When I'm not with you, I'm thinking about when I'll see you next, and I keep trying to convince myself that this is just friendship, but it's not. Not for me, not anymore." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at him as he continued. "I'm falling for you, Mason. Maybe I've been falling for you this whole time and just didn't want to admit it. And I understand if you don't feel the same way, I really do, but I couldn't keep pretending that I don't feel what I feel. It was eating me alive." The break room was completely silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of someone's conversation in the hallway. I realized Parker was waiting for me to say something, and the vulnerability in his expression, the fear and hope mixed together, broke something open inside me. "Parker," I said, and my voice came out rough, unsteady. "I've been in love with you for months, maybe longer. I just didn't think you could possibly feel the same way." The smile that spread across his face was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "You're serious?" "Completely serious. You're the best part of my day every single day. I plan my mornings around seeing you at lunch. I save things up to tell you. I lie awake at night thinking about you. I'm so far gone for you that it's honestly a little embarrassing." He laughed, this bright, joyful sound, and reached across the table to take my hand. This time, there was no pretense of casual friendship in the gesture. His fingers laced through mine, deliberate and certain, and the touch sent electricity up my arm. "So what do we do now?" he asked. I don't know, I admitted. I've never done this before. The falling for your coworker thing? Me neither, he said. But maybe we could start with an actual date, outside of this break room, outside of work. I'd really like that. We sat there, holding hands across the table, grinning at each other like idiots, until someone else came into the break room and we reluctantly pulled apart. But something fundamental had shifted. The world felt different, brighter, full of possibility. Our first real date was that Friday. Parker picked me up at my apartment, and I spent an embarrassing amount of time getting ready, changing my shirt 3 times before settling on the first one I'd tried on. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, dressed in dark jeans and a button-down shirt, holding a single sunflower because he'd remembered me mentioning once that they were my favourite, I fell a little bit more in love with him. We went to a small Italian restaurant that Parker knew, tucked away on a quiet street, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. We talked for hours, the same easy conversation we'd always had, but now with this new layer of possibility, of romance. Under the table our knees touched, and neither of us moved away. When we left the restaurant, Parker took my hand as we walked to his car, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. He drove me home, and we sat in his car outside my building, neither of us quite ready to end the night. I had a really good time, I said, which felt inadequate for what I actually felt. Me too, Parker said. He turned to face me, and in the dim light from the street lamp his eyes were dark and serious. Can I kiss you? I nodded, not trusting my voice, and he leaned across the console, his hand coming up to cup my cheek, and kissed me. It was gentle and sweet and perfect, and when we finally pulled apart I was breathless. Wow, I whispered. Yeah, he agreed. Wow. We started dating officially after that, though we kept it quiet at work initially, not because we were ashamed, but because we wanted something that was just ours before it became office gossip. But we still had lunch together every single day, same time, same table. Only now, sometimes Parker would brush his foot against mine under the table, or I'd catch him looking at me with this soft expression that made my chest tight. Eventually, people at work figured it out. We weren't particularly subtle in retrospect. The way we looked at each other probably gave it away long before anyone saw us holding hands in the parking lot. But our co-workers were supportive, happy for us. Our supervisor just rolled her eyes and said, "Finally, we've been running a betting pool on when you two would get together." Things weren't always perfect. We had disagreements, moments of frustration, times when work stress spilled over into our relationship. But we learned to communicate, to be honest with each other, to work through problems instead of avoiding them, and through it all, we never stopped having lunch together. Even when one of us was having a terrible day, even when we'd argued the night before, even when we were both swamped with calls and barely had time to breathe, we made time for lunch together. It became our anchor, this daily ritual that had started as coincidence and evolved into the foundation of our relationship. About 2 years into dating, Parker got offered a promotion to a different department. Better pay, better hours, more responsibility. It was an incredible opportunity, but it meant his lunch schedule would change. He'd be eating at 1 instead of noon. He came to me, conflicted, and said, "I don't want to lose our lunches together." I thought about it, about how much those daily lunches meant to both of us, and I said, "Then we won't lose them. I'll talk to my supervisor about shifting my lunch hour. It's just a schedule change. We'll figure it out." And we did. I moved my lunch to 1 o'clock, and even though it meant adjusting my whole routine, it was worth it. Because those 30 minutes in the middle of each day, sitting across from Parker, talking about everything and nothing, were sacred to me. They were where we'd fallen in love. They were where we continued to nurture that love, day after day. 3 years into our relationship, Parker and I moved in together. We found a small apartment with good light and enough space for his piano. We learned each other's domestic habits, the way he always left cabinet doors open, and I always forgot to put the cap back on the toothpaste. We built a life together, small and quiet and ours, but we still worked at the same company, still sat near each other, still had lunch together every single day. People would sometimes ask Parker, "Don't you get sick of spending so much time together? You work together, you live together, you have lunch together every day." And he'd always smile and say, "No, I never get sick of him." The truth is, those lunches remained special even after we'd built a whole life together. Because they were ours, this tradition we'd created before we were even dating. that had survived the transition from co-workers to friends to something more. They were a constant in our lives, a daily reminder of how we'd started, of how far we'd come. Last week, on our 4th anniversary, Parker surprised me at lunch. We were sitting at our usual table, and he seemed nervous, fidgeting with his napkin in a way that wasn't like him. I asked if he was okay, and he said, "Yeah, I just have something for you." He pulled out a small box and my heart stopped. He opened it to reveal 2 simple silver bands, and he said, "I know this isn't the most romantic setting, and I know we're at work, but this is where it all started. This is where I fell in love with you. Every lunch we've shared, every conversation, every moment has led to this. Mason, will you marry me?" I was crying, didn't even realize it until I felt the tears on my cheeks. "Yes," I said. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slipped one of the rings onto my finger, and I slipped the other onto his, and we sat there holding hands across the table, the same way we had hundreds of times before, but now with this new promise between us. Someone from accounting walked into the break room, saw us, and said, "Oh my God, did you guys just get engaged?" And when we nodded, she ran out yelling, "Parker and Mason just got engaged in the break room." Within minutes, half the office had crowded in, congratulating us, and our supervisor brought out a cake she'd apparently been keeping in the staff fridge for weeks, because Parker had told her he was planning to propose. It was chaotic and overwhelming and perfect. That night, lying in bed, I turned to Parker and said, "I can't believe you proposed at lunch." He smiled, pulling me closer. "Where else would I propose? That's our place. That's where everything began." And he was right. It all started with lunch, with 2 strangers heating up their food in a break room, making small talk to pass the time. It grew into friendship, into love, into this life we've built together. And through it all, we've never stopped having lunch together. People talk about grand romantic gestures, about dramatic declarations of love, about fireworks and passion. And those things are great, they have their place. But for me, love is quieter than that. Love is showing up every day. Love is saving someone a seat. Love is learning how they take their coffee and what makes them laugh, and what they need when they're having a hard day. Love is never taking your lunch without them, even when it would be easier, even when schedules change, even when you've been together for years and the novelty has worn off. Love is choosing every single day to make space for that person in your life. I'm Mason, and I fell in love with my coworker over lunch breaks and microwaved leftovers. We built something extraordinary out of something ordinary, found forever in 30-minute increments, one lunch at a time, and I wouldn't change a single thing about how it happened. Because the truth is, the greatest love story of my life started with the simple decision to share a meal with someone, to sit down, to listen, to be present. And every day, we choose to keep that story going, one lunch at a time. Total char count, 24,847.